Ben.
I've restarted the recording. There's a reason for that. Don't worry. Carry on. Sorry,
Okay.
guys.
Over to you, Dan.
Okay. Well, people, nice to meet you all. Thank you for your time. The only thing you need to know about me is that I've been working with informal networks and databases, describing them, reason why I've carried on. And that will do for me. Thank you.
Very good. Short and sweet. Just so you have some awareness of what you're letting yourselves in for, we have 50 minutes or so. So the sorts of things we're going to be covering is, in the conventional world, what do we have to help us really understand the nature of our organizations and how they really work. I'm sure this audience will have no trouble in coming forward with what they feel is missing from the conventional approaches. We're going to be able to explore some organizational networks by way of a case study using the charts that Networker produces. And we're going to also be talking a bit about our approach and how we typically work with our clients' teams to use those charts in a way that supports them to address their challenges for themselves. We hope there will be time for the conversation to emerge, and we would encourage you all to interrupt, use the chat, ask questions as we go along. And finally, just kind of a very small caveat, what we're going to be doing today is not using the software live for all sorts of reasons, but just showing a very small selection of slides. If anybody is interested and would like to participate as an individual or as a smaller group, and we can work with the software live and follow their curiosity and present the slides that they would like to see in the form that they would like to see them, then please do get in touch. There's a little QR code there that you can connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd be more than happy to do that. That would be a pleasure. So I wonder were I to ask you to draw a representation of an organization that you know well, does anyone want to have a go at that, or does someone want to describe what they would draw? What's your preference? But I am looking for some audience participation, please. I hate it when they all rush at once, Dan, don't you?
Oh, it's embarrassing.
It is, isn't it?
Well, if I can come in here, I would still think of the pyramid can work quite well, although I prefer a flat structure if you can do that. But one can't always easily get a flat structure, even though you want one.
Very good. Yeah. So the org chart. Anything else? I know what Patrick would be saying if he were here. Tony's nodding.
Perhaps a VSM diagram, yeah.
Yeah. So kind of invariably, this is where we end up. And, I ask the same question of people that we work with, and I ask the same question of the MBA students that I teach. And yeah, they invariably end up with this. But what's interesting about the organogram is the sorts of assumptions that it reinforces. And you can almost see that it's more important to do good work for and impress your boss than it is to please the customer, because actually the customer doesn't feature in that representation. By the way, bonus question, does anyone know where it originates from, where the first recording organogram came from? David, I suspect you may know this. It was drawn by an electrical engineer who's Ben Taylor, I'm sure you do. The Peter Scholtes book. So yeah, it originates from a Western Railroad accident in 1841. And he drew a box and line diagram to find out who he was going to blame, who they should be blaming. So there you are, reinforcing linear reductive thinking ever since. So just some questions. How useful is it for understanding how the work gets done, how knowledge gets renewed and value gets created in the organization? Where's the customer or the new and exciting market to capture in the future? Who holds the valuable relationships, not just within the organization, but beyond it, you know, thinking about customers, suppliers, regulators, etc., all entirely absent.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure in this, in amongst the group of people gathered here this evening, we're all in heated agreement. This is kind of an artifact that bears actually very little relation to the reality of how organizations work and how people collaborate together, getting stuff done, solving problems, dreaming up workarounds, improving processes, etc., etc. And so we could say that the reality looks, you know, something like this, you know, so by color, these people are joined up across those boundaries and in the white spaces to do all that good stuff. But, you know, I've never been presented with an org chart on the first day of an assignment with a client that had the squiggly lines on. So yeah, the reality is much more messy, and it's all about interactions, sharing resources, solving problems, all that kind of good stuff. And then instinctively, we know this, don't we? We know that it's through collaborative networks, and that's how the work gets done. That's how value gets created. That's how problems get solved and innovation happens. So what if we could look beyond the formal and the documented, and we could get under the bonnet of the reality of the organization, not just within the organization, but perhaps the wider value chain. And that's what our networker tool does for us. It elicits data from everyone in the network on specific subjects, and Denis will talk some more about that, and then presents it back visually. So unless there are any questions at that stage, I'd like to hand over to Denis, who will take us through the charts.
Any questions? Right, can I just issue a little gypsy's warning before we start? This particular database we're going to use tonight has got 22,000 links in it. And that means we can draw about 80,000 different pictures. I promise you I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to show you 6 diagrams, and we'll try and derive from those how this thing actually works and why it is successful. So Ben, first chart. This is an absolutely typical networker chart. There are 7 large circles with different colors, and each of those represents the formal organization structure. In other words, the one up at the top left is the laboratory, and there's a manager in there with some direct reports. Ditto with the other 6. The little circles have initials in them, and they are the individual people who participated in one of these exercises, who actually gave us data. I'll explain that comment in a moment. And the lines join pairs of people with whom there is a relationship. Again, a little warning here, we can draw agreed links, we can draw disagreed links, we can even draw denied links. And a denied link is where one person claims a link of some sort and puts a value on it, and the other person says, no, it doesn't exist at all. I don't have a working relationship on this subject with this individual. You can't see it terribly well on this particular, you'll see it more clearly on the next charts, but these links have little arrows on them. And some links have got arrows at both ends and some at one end only. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, this particular topic was giving and getting information on new technology. And here, we call it a give-get. One person claims they give, the other person claims they get, or both claim, or one only, or whatever it is. So we can have multiple different versions of these links. That's just, I need to take a very tiny digression there. We don't do data mining. We don't work with existing databases. We always start with something which is custom built for the client. And that means we have to do some front-end research to find out what it is that's bubbling away under the surface that the top brass don't actually know about. And in this particular case, it was a company whose new product development process, which had been an enormous sense, a source of competitive success, had started to fail, and they did all the traditional things like re-engineering the process, which didn't make a scrap of difference, at which point we were asked to help. So we set the thing up. We collected our data from these people. Each individual does it online. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to produce. And then we get into looking at the charts. If you look around this particular screen, you'll see some of the individuals, their circles are in faint and are dashed, and they are known as isolates. And an isolate is simply someone who has no agreed links within the definition that we put into the query to draw it. Doesn't make them bad people. You might not be surprised, for example, to see that marketing has no agreed links anywhere on new technology information. Well, that's not terribly surprising. Maybe, but not terribly surprising. Engineering in the bottom left-hand corner has the most, and DOF, who's the head of engineering, is extremely busy. And then you look at satellite number 1, the red one on the right, that looks okay. Yellow pre-production looks okay. Main factory, a lot of isolates. Laboratory, a lot of isolates. Satellite factory number 2, a lot of isolates. So immediately, just that one very simple chart starts to generate a lot of questions. Why is this happening? What is the nature of the system here? Ben, if you could just bring up the next picture.
We've just got a question that's coming on the chat
Okay.
from Benjamin Kerma. Hope I've got that right. How do you deal with a lack of information flow in an organisation which impedes efficient working? Benjamin, perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit more about
that. Thank you. Yes, I mean, to be honest, I'm referring to my own organization, where basically we have delivery, well, the structure is basically you have people doing delivery, and then you have people doing operations, and then people doing analysis. Now, the problem is that you want information on, the analysts want information on the delivery and operations, but the delivery people are not actually trained to capture data. And so you have this problem of almost every time analysts have to go to the delivery people to ask, for very basic pieces of information. And that is where it impedes efficient working. How do you sort of deal with that sort of situation where that information flow is impaired?
Benjamin, I have to take a tiny digression here before I can answer your question. Number one is that there are other types of links that we can draw. We normally work with the current reality, but we can also work with should be links. And here we're asking people less to describe what is, but how it should be. And if there are people who are not getting information that they should be getting, then they will almost certainly appear. Second quick comment is a more general one, and that is that although all of the stuff that we do comes under the heading of organizational network analysis, ONA, we don't actually do any analysis. And one of the things we've learned over the years is that we never know enough about the people. We never know enough about the individual organization and the issues rumbling around it. We don't understand management style. And every single time we've ever looked at a chart and said what this means is, we've been proven wrong, so we don't do it anymore. So the answer to your question is, if we found charts like this one and another one I'm going to show you shortly, if we see charts that are indicating a fractured information flow, then we're going to put them in front of the people and say, work it out for yourself. We don't know the answer, we never do, but it's up to them to work out meaning from looking at the charts and come up with the solutions. Our job is to give them good data, a safe working environment, and the opportunity to work it out for themselves.
Yeah. Can I quickly, just comment on that? Yes, you are quite right, and that seems to be the solution that is being offered. But it still doesn't, you have been honest to say, you don't really understand them. I mean, you prefer the people to basically you give them the tools and let them, sort of come out with
Benjamin,
yes.
Let me echo what Ben said. If you would like an opportunity for us to walk you through this sort of stuff using the actual software and not a presentation,
Yeah.
I'd be absolutely delighted to do that.
Yes.
And we could take your question and find ways of illustrating it in one of these databases and see what we can work out for you. Delighted to do that. That's just happy to do it.
Yeah.
I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
Good
but
stuff.
I was just what I was actually trying to say was that you sort of touched at the crux of the problem, that those who are trying to create find a solution don't know enough about the actual situation. Is the people themselves, and yet the people themselves probably don't even know that they have that problem. I mean, they are not aware that they could work more efficiently if it was better information flow. So that is what is going on in my organization, and it's really difficult.
Well, the offer is there. Please take it up if you wish. Be absolutely delighted to spend the time with you. And I guess the issue comes down to if our early research and if the client's brief says there's a problem, we'll try and illustrate that with charts, picking the very topic that they're talking to us about. And then we'll feed it back to the people and say, what do you think, guys? But be prepared. The number of times over the years we've had people say, well, that's not actually a problem. Okay, it's not a problem. Well, talk to us about why it isn't a problem.
Yes, and an organogram doesn't help in that situation.
Okay, so please do give us a call if you would like that.
Yeah.
Interesting question, which we've touched on slightly out of sequence. And the question is always who does the analysis? And we've already given you that answer. Is because we don't do it. We've just been proven wrong so many times, and we've got wonderful results from not doing it. And Ben has a little tale to tell here, which is quite nice.
Well, it's Rugby World Cup year once more. No, the story is a very, very simple one. Clive Woodward invested in some very, very new technology analysis capability in the run into the 2003 World Cup. It's the first rugby team in the tournament. It's the only rugby team in the tournament to use it. And the interesting thing about that in the context of this is that he too did not get his coaches to do the analysis and prescribe changes. What he did was to encourage the teams to get into small subgroups gave them the wherewithal to be able to mine the data, bring the analyses out that they were interested in looking at, and devise their own experiments for the training drills on the practice field and indeed in game time, to make the most of what they could do against their opposition. So we weren't the first to come up with this idea, but it served us very, very well over the years. And so far as we know, there's lots of people offering organizational network analysis, but no one offering what we do, which is all about creating a safe space for teams to solve their own wicked problems based on fresh and insightful data that we bring.
Good, thank you. So same chart again, just to remind you, big circles, departmental groups, little one individuals, links join pairs of people where there is an agreement that information on new technology is being given and got. Ben. Same chart, same data, but now we've got rid of all the isolates. They've gone from the screen. And you can see the patterns in and between the departmental groups rather more clearly. And the issue here is a very simple one. The networks of information flowing have very, very little connection with the formal structure. All of the links between people in different groups are not on the organization chart. The vast majority of the links between people within the groups are not on the organization chart. So the reality of how this thing works has very little connection with the way the organization chart presents its tidy little picture. Ben. Now, here's an interesting one, and let me explain here before you look farther into this. We actually have 4 clustering algorithms in our product, and we're only going to show you one of them tonight. And that one is represented here because within every single topic, on every single dimension of our database, there's always an inner cabinet. And the inner cabinet is in the control of that particular topic, whatever it may be. And here you can see that the red department and the light blue engineering are absolutely dominating the whole thing, with DOF at 9 o'clock being the head of engineering as the key player. And you've got some people at the top, AS and FS, who are connected with the group, but not actually part of it. And they are known as attached isolates. They're attached to the group, but not truly part of it. And the biggest attached chain that we've ever seen had 15 people in it. You think about that, 15 people in a row. What's the chances of the people at the boot end actually having any influence whatsoever on what goes on this topic? And the answer is absolutely 0. So the group power structure allows us to look inside a topic and see where the real action is going on. Ben. Now, here's a challenging one for you, because these are now not agreed links. These are denied links, denied, where one person has said, I give information which is at least very important on new technology, and the other one says, I don't get it at all, period. And if you look carefully, you'll see all the lines have a little blob at one end, and the blob is at the end of denial. And some of the little blobs are light grey and some are dark grey. And the light grey are links of denial between people in different groups. And the dark grey are links of denial within the group, And just to illustrate one little point, if you look at the top right-hand corner in pre-production, and you'll see a chap called JT, who has no agreed links, but 4 denied links. And this is where the immediate instinctive reaction is, well, he must be a very awkward devil. And you say, no, you can't draw that conclusion by looking at that chart. And if I just give you one example, in one application, we had a guy on the end of should be links, where people were saying we should be working with this guy on this topic. And he was saying, not on your Nelly. And he had 9 of those denied links. And the fascinating thing was, in the workshop, when we got everyone around the table to talk about this stuff, he looked around and said, what do you want to talk to me for on this stuff? Why me? And the response was, don't you understand how highly valued your information is? And he simply didn't know. He hadn't appreciated that. And he grew a foot just sitting there thinking, hey, all these people really value my input on this stuff. So there's another little insight that we can generate where we have denied links. We can also have disagreed links where people agree the link exists, but differ about its value. Okay, Ben. Last chart. This is similar to the first one, but it's not about giving and getting information. It's about adding value through sharing learning. And the interesting thing here is if you compare it with the first chart, which was about giving and getting information, the mechanics, this one is very thin. So these guys and girls seem to be quite good at passing information around, but they ain't learning from it, unfortunately. And you can see the main factory in particular and the satellite factory in the bottom right-hand corner. Neither of those is into learning. And that must raise some questions about what's actually going on there. And this is one of the reasons why we like to leave the isolates in at first, so we can see where they are and how many of them there are. Ben. Wasn't the last chart. This is the last chart. Same chart, but with the isolates removed again.
Awesome.
Okay. Now we've got to ask the so what question. So we've got all this stuff, but so what? We've got pictures, we have lines and we have circles, and we have insights that something surprising is at work. The charts never match the expectation and they never match the reality. For what it's worth, in my 40 years of doing this stuff, I've yet to come across an organization where the real hidden stuff has any connection whatsoever with the formal structure. That the two things are simply disconnected. And yet, what do we do every few years? We decide to reorganize. So we sit around the table and we draw lines on pieces of paper, and we spend a lot of money and a lot of energy changing that which doesn't exist in the first place. that's the simple reality. The organization chart is a figment of the imagination, doesn't connect with reality at all. Ben. But so what? I'll have to come back to that one, Tony. The issue about informal or real networks is once we get a handle on what they are like and what's actually happening, it does enable us to solve problems. And that's particularly true when we put in a should be link, because here we're asking people to design their own informal organization and how they think it really should be operating. But what sort of problems? Tony, you got a question? Tony?
You're on mute.
I was on mute. I was really kind of following up on Benjamin's point, which was about linking information flows to decision-making and power structures. And obviously,
yes,
that sort of power loop that you showed in an earlier slide is interesting. Influence works where people have power. But I wonder whether you actually attempted at any point to sort of link some of this, showing the way that the network actually worked, into kind of rapid analysis. Because if you get into decision making, then you get into the questions around, well, who's responsible for making a decision, who's accountable, who's consulted or bought in, then who has the awful job of actually taking the decision away and implementing it. And it'd be really interesting to look at the interactions between information flows, decision making. And I've only ever used rapid once, but I kind of found it very useful because it sort of helped to sort of unpack a whole set of assumptions around where decision making worked, who had power, but also the poor buggers who had to go away and actually do something with the decision
and go and then make it happen somewhere else in the organization, whether in the power structure or not.
Yeah. Well, Tony, bless you, you've just started my argument for me. So thank you for that. One of the issues about organization charts is that they're actually mechanisms for distributing power. They distribute decision power mainly about things like resources. And the question then becomes, well, what happens when you haven't got power? And the answer to that conundrum is really quite simple, because although power is sometimes seen as a dirty word, it's people forcing their will onto others. The fact of the matter is that without power, we can't accomplish anything. And you back off that and look under the surface, and we find that informal networks distribute influence. And influence is one of the sources of power. And where you get a bunch of people in a room looking at some of these charts and working out, normally in cross-functional groups, working out what they mean and what that tells us about the nature of our problems and what to do about them, they will exert influence over each other, and as such, they become very powerful. So, but those are elements of power through influence which come about on specific topics. And that's something we're just about to go on to, because that perfectly matches the need for dealing with wicked problems. Because the one thing you can absolutely guarantee with wicked problems is there's never a single simple solution. It doesn't exist. And what we get is a lot of partial causes and partial solutions, therefore. But there, where we're dealing with relatively small stuff, the power issue becomes much, much smaller. The group has its own source of power. It's called influence. And again, I'd love to talk about that subject with you some other time, because it's a real biggie and it's troubling one of our clients at the moment.
Cool.
Okay, press on.
Can I move on?
Yes, please do. So 3 types of problems we have to tackle, which are tame, critical, and wicked. And critical are the survival of the business is at stake. Someone has to take control and just say, do it, do this, do that, do something else. Tame are the sort of routine stuff that we do as part of our normal life. But wicked problems are the most challenging. No simple single causes, no simple single solutions, complexity rules. And this is where the working with informal networks really comes into its own, because they don't come up with big death-defying solutions. They come up with multiple small partial solutions, and you implement them and they start to permeate their way through the organization, and people say, hey, we can fix this, we've done it, we can do it again, with a little bit of prompting from their friends. And one of the interesting things about wicked problems is there aren't any big ideas out there. There's no best practice that can be applied apart from how we deal with things, but not in terms of the solutions. And that means that solving wicked problems does actually require a very different approach, which isn't the singular problem, find the cause, fix it. That simply doesn't work with wicked problems. And the reality is that most organizational problems are wicked, because organizations are inherently complex. A single individual is complex. Groups of individuals transacting together are complex. By the time you look at the whole organization, it's horrendously complex. And therefore, most organizational challenges are, in fact, wicked problems. Now, we've used Network all over the world, a bit like David, actually, with a wide variety of organizations. And we could give you a long list of the sort of problems that we have tackled, but here's a short list for you. The one we've been looking at is product innovation in a South African engineering company. It had all gone up the Swanee. They re-engineered the process, didn't work, so needed something different. The second one is an insurance company, which is a global company, which had become extremely successful in one particular sector of its market. And then they discovered that that market was in decline and actually going to disappear completely because of new regulations. So they had to get themselves geared up for exploiting emerging markets, which they survived the experience. So we must have got something right between us. This was an organization in Italy, and with changes in regulations, their simple supply chain became very complex. And they were forced by new regulations to deal with their suppliers in a different way. And we helped them with Networker, building those external relationships between their organization and their key suppliers. Ben, yeah. So how we get started. The very first thing that we do, and we work extremely hard on this to get it as good, insightful information defining the problem. So front-end research, define the database, collect the data, do a very crude, what are the possibly interesting charts that come out of this, and then sit down with the people. But all our experience says that reports and text and tables and spreadsheets don't actually hack it. People don't relate to them. But visual data with graphics and patterns work better, especially when they discover they start to understand some of the stuff that's previously been buried inside the organization. And this is absolutely critical. In the workshops that we run, we provide a very safe environment for them to work on that information. And just to illustrate, we have some rules which are quite fun. And one rule is, no, Mr. Director, Mr. Chief Executive, you can't join these workshops unless you fill in the questionnaire and you're up on the screen with everybody else. And no, you can't just bail in. So we restrict the workshops to people who provide the data. Nobody else can interfere, and that is one of the ways that we create safety. Identify partial causes and the relationships between them, and a key message coming up next, I do believe. Yeah. How are we going to enter the mess is the question. We've got this huge complex mess of an organization. We've got loads of complex data illustrating what's going on. How do we enter it? And one of the lovely things about wicked problems is it doesn't actually matter. Because everything is connected with everything, it doesn't actually matter where you enter the complexity, because that will get all the dots joined up as we go through. And we find it actually doesn't matter. It's more about getting started and learning, experimenting. And then that takes us everywhere. And finally, the people agree management actions. These are the things that the boss needs to do because we haven't got the authority. And this is part of what we agree up front. And also they agree safe to try experiments, where in marine parlance, if this goes wrong, it's not going to hold us below the waterline. And then we observe how the system responds, and then the follow-up. And then there is an iterative, never-ending process of fiddling about with the way that the processes, the systems work, and keep improving them. So quick recap. Every organization has these informal networks. They're always invisible to management. They're transitory, they come and go, they reform, they disappear. And they are the entities by which knowledge and value are created. This is how the organization actually gets value through to the customer. So we collect data about those relationships only as they refer to specific topics, which is whatever it is the wicked problem that we were given. And we do it in virtually real time because the networks are transitory. We can't do this as a 6-month exercise. It's all going to be wrapped up in a couple of weeks. That gets us under the bonnet, how they're creating knowledge and what can we do to create more knowledge and ultimately create more value. And that is the name of the game. So our business is about providing insightful data and the opportunity to work it. And that's enough of me.
Well done, Dan. I was battling a little bit then. I should have said this up front, but Denis joins us from the south of France, and the strand of copper sometimes doesn't always play ball. So there was a little bit of slowness sometimes in the connection.
Apologies for that.
I hope you were all able to. No, it was absolutely fine. I was just having to build that into my judgment of when I click the mouse. So I'm really just making excuses for myself for being a bit crappy on the mouse clicks. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys now. As Denis said, that's quite enough hot air from us, from either side of the channel. So yeah, what out of that sparks your curiosity? What more would you like to know?
Great, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Denis. I'm going to stop the sharing so we can get all the pictures back again. That way, if people want to talk and ask questions, you can come off mute, put your hand up, ask a question, put it in the chat. How would you want to do it? I'm open to. I haven't seen any hands raised yet, but if people want to come off mute and pipe up, I'm equally happy. Oh, David, you're off. You're on mute, David. But oh no,
I'm not now. I'm unmuted. Yeah. I just wanted to say I was actually very impressed by that, and I see some common links actually in delving into the organisation. There's an amazing commonality in some of the areas of finding out secret things that are going on that you don't know going on, and I'll maybe have another chat with you at some point, because I think we could learn a lot from that. It's really very interesting. Thank you very much.
Well, David, we did do a very interesting job for BP in the North Sea, based in Aberdeen, and it was all around safety systems. And I'd be very happy to share that with you.
That's very interesting. I will tell a funny story. BP and myself are not necessarily best pals at times.
David, we're in the same club.
I wonder why. I think Nikki's asked a good question about using it in public services. I was thinking particularly of integrated care systems in healthcare. Nikki, do you want to expand on that, or?
Yeah, I'm just trying to. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was just thinking there's a big drive towards integrating different organisations together with the new integrated care systems, which is obviously about relation. Well, it's about all sorts of things, but relational stuff is particularly important to get that integration going and working collaboratively and increasing value and creativity, etc. But this is a massive, this is multiple organisations, and I wondered whether you'd done anything like that, used it in the public sector, which I suspect is different from business.
Well, we've worked with this stuff. We've worked with this stuff with about 8 or 9 police forces, with local authorities, with NHS trusts. We've done stuff like antisocial behaviour orders, that sort of thing. We've done it with service quality, and the answer is yes. Yes, I mean, there is a limit in terms of size, but the limit is not imposed by the technology, it's imposed by people. If we have too big a database with too much information, people can't hack it, they can't process it. And we're more likely to fail by giving too much information than too little. But yes, we've done loads of public sector, and in Italy, public sector organizations in Italy as well, one in South Africa. Oh, and the US, educational organizations and public transport systems.
Yeah, I'll maybe chip in there. Lovely to see you first and foremost, Nikki. So glad you came along. Yeah, I mean, I think the way of making this manageable, and it doesn't always come across quite so clearly sometimes when we're introducing people to the creation of these informal networks, is we can actually be quite specific in the query that we ask the database. So you can make the context really, really quite narrow and quite specific, where you're potentially dealing with a really broad, large-scale, multi-organization population of people who might have an interest in that thing. So that's the way that we can not miss anybody out, have huge reach, but also make the charts sort of manageable enough such that we can get, you know, most of the players on the same screen at the same time. And that's, yeah, that doesn't always come across, but we can ask some very, very precise questions in gathering the data. And that really does help, especially when we're dealing with large populations.
Nikki, can I just ask you a quick question? It typically, in the sort of organizations you're talking about, what sort of degree of frustration is there amongst employees?
Oh, quite high levels, because it's very hierarchical.
Yes.
Partly. Yeah.
Yeah, partly because of that.
And because it feels that we've got lots of, in healthcare, lots of wicked problems, and it all feels a bit unwieldy.
Yes. But then consider where you've got people who are highly frustrated, people who are intensely caring about their clients, their customers, for want of a better word. Give them the opportunity to provide should-be data. We've done this with one bunch of nurses, and it was fascinating. And the demand for the system to work differently was absolutely enormous, because they were exercising their frustration, saying, well, it shouldn't be like this. This is the way it should be. And it's just great to work with people given that sort of scenario.
Yeah, thank you.
One last
Great
question.
question.
So is it okay for me to ask?
Please, Ron,
Ron.
go ahead. Love to
Ron.
see you too.
Hi, Ben. Yeah, good talk. Everybody, the talks today were very interesting, very interesting. One of the things that I'm trying to get to grips with complex systems is that they're never stable. They're
Yes.
always changing, okay? And I wondered how this affects your model.
The only way that it affects us is in the sense that we have to work extremely quickly. Because otherwise, if we take 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is to get from data collection through to working through the data with people in the organization, it's already out of date, it's gone. It's an unstable environment. But then that's why people end up, we hope, comfortable with the idea that they start tweaking it, and that the tweaking will lead to learning. And that it's okay to tweak stuff, and it doesn't always succeed. Sometimes it will fail, but that's fine. Let's try it.
Okay, so it's back down to practical use by the people who are actually involved in this system. It's great, great.
Yeah. And I think when you're in that cycle of, you know, change, observe, reflect, refine, etc. I could use the essay, but I'm in the wrong club, so I'm not going to. Then, you know, the minute you change the system, then the system is new anyway, but your antenna are out for what has it improved the performance of the system and the experience of the people that deliver, or the experience of the people at the end of it, or not. So then actually, once you start changing the system, you are tuned into how the system is responding. And the fact that you are half a dozen iterations of change experiments down the line, you probably don't need to refer back to the original charts that you did 6 weeks ago, because the world has moved on. But what you've done is you've honed in on to use Denis's words, you've gone into the mess through a door and you found some stuff that is responding favorably to the changes that you'll make, and then you're off, then you're away. And the other thing that's happened is you've brought people together from across organizations and across functional specialties who now are actually forming up quite a high trust, high banter, typically, team, because they're enjoying the work of figuring stuff out and solving problems and making life better. And with that, you can do almost anything, right?
Right, good. Very interesting, thank you.